Hello and welcome to the Gauntlet Podcast. My name is Lowell, and this is another one of our monthly interviews. And this month, we're very, very lucky to have with us Gareth Ryder-Hanrahan. And I could go through his credits completely, but that would probably take the entire episode. If we look at RPG Geek, I see a listing for 185 different projects that he's worked on, and I'm certain that that is not all of them, but I worked on a number of core books for Conan, the 2nd edition, Babylon 5, 2nd edition, Fear Itself, 2nd edition, Mongoose Traveler, The Laundry, which is a line that he oversaw, Primeval. There are a whole host of those. And then as an adventure writer for 13th Age, Ashen Stars, Paranoia for Mongoose, Trail of Cthulhu, Time Watch, Mongoose RuneQuest, Mutant City Blues, Doctor Who, Pathfinder, just a host of different games. And there's a bit I remember from one of the Ken and Robin podcasts where they talk about having him chained in the basement to do their work. So thank you for joining us today.
Not at all. I like people like you're sitting there in front of me, give me a litany of all the things I've done. It's a great sense of accomplishment.
So last night, I noticed before you went to bed on Twitter, you were talking about this idea of authorial certainty, the idea that there's an axis for writers of adventures where they talk about how confident they need to be in what they're giving to the players and GM. Can you talk maybe a little bit about what you're thinking with that?
When you're writing an adventure, especially a long campaign, at the start of it, you know it's almost like quantum mechanics. You know the exact speed and position of the player characters. They're not moving. You know that if you write an adventure for a bunch of Cthulhu investigators, they are going to be a bunch of relatively normal, relatively sane individuals who are eager to get on with the mystery. And the first scene of the adventure, you're pretty sure that's going to play out according to how you've written it in the book. But as the adventure goes on, and the players take decisions that you either can't predict or you don't know which of the several options they're going to pick. You don't know if they've gone to the library and then the haunted house, or the haunted house and the library. The sort of cone of probabilities gets wider and wider and wider and wider. And by the end of the adventure, you don't know if they are still a band of stalwart investigators, or if the professor has gone mad and is now convinced that the other investigators all have bugs in their heads. He's trying to murder them, and it's turned this serial killer in the haunted house. And there are various tools you can use to drag the plot back to a predictable state. And saying the dungeon, for example, because everything's constrained inside a set of rooms, the writer doesn't necessarily know if the players go left or right, but he knows they're in the dungeon for the whole adventure. But for something more open-ended, like Cthulhu Investigation, they're probably following the trail of clues, but you can't be certain of that. And for something wide open, very sort of story-heavy, you are a bunch of vampires in the city, and you're trying to take it over. You have no idea where the players will go, so you often do there various scenes or external events or sort of bottlenecks that will drag things back to some level of predictability. And it struck me that is a problem that really only exists in interactive narratives, especially in role-playing games and to a lesser extent in computer games, where the writer doesn't know how the audience is experiencing it.
Well, and especially in computer games where there's some heavy needs for doing dialogue and things like that has to respond to those kinds of state changes.
Yeah, and in computer games as well, because you can't model an entire world if you want to have any level of narrative complexity, you have to drag things back to the plot, whereas role-playing games can theoretically go in any direction, although they rarely do.
Now, you mentioned the dungeon as a place where the things are sort of constrained, or at least start with some linearity, but I don't think that's true for what I want to call your magnum opus, Eyes of the Stone Thief, which is a mega dungeon, is a brilliant 13th Age module that I've stolen repeatedly from. It's a variable dungeon inside a moving creature. Can you tell us about what you did there, and then maybe about how you approached actually going to write something like that?
In 13th Age, there's living dungeons which swim up from the depths of the earth and become dungeons on the surface. And the Stone Thief is an unusual one where it sort of eats bits of the surface and turns them into more dungeon levels. And the original concept was Moby Dick the dungeon, basically. It is, I take your point that there, because the dungeon is mutable and changes, it's hard to predict. But there, you sort of have free license to sort of drop whatever adventure is most appropriate in front of the players at the time. So Whereas I couldn't predict like what direction the players would go in. It was more a question there of giving the GM, like, if your players like fighting undead, here's the undead section, drop that in front of them. If the players are doing too well and are making too much progress in the dungeon, and you want to give them a tougher fight, here is the whole level of tougher fights. If they need a way to escape, here is the exit route from the dungeon, and you can sort of drop things in front of them, and it still gives them because there were choices in each of those rooms as to how they would progress. It wasn't a complete sort of building a railroad in front of them, but it didn't have the same. It did some narrative constraints that a regular dungeon has, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that made any sense at all, but it sounded good.
No, it does. And how did that project come about? Because, that's a massive undertaking. And I want to stress this for anyone who hasn't taken a look at it. You really should. There's brilliant pieces in it. There's an homage to old-style TSR modules in it that pops out of nowhere. That's pretty brilliant.
The frustrating bit is we get so many complaints about that section.
Really?
Where people going you forgot to lay it out. Or they're going, no, we spent weeks digging up the fonts and mimicking the old TSR layout. Anyway, pearls before swine. But no, I just don't think it was slightly embarrassing actually, because it was pitched to my poor employers at Pelgrane Press as a much more modest, much shorter, it'll take me 2 months to do, 96, 138 pages tops, maybe. And then I started writing it, and it just, as the dungeon itself does, grew and grew and grew and kept sprawling out. And they were very forgiving and accepted the 360-page monstrosity that was eventually dropped in their laps.
How much was cut? Is it pretty intact, or were there things that were left on the cutting room floor?
It's pretty much as is. I tend to be a fairly economical writer in that respect. I'll rarely write stuff that gets dropped out, and because the dungeon is the campaign really is just so sprawling and so modular. As you drop levels of the dungeon, there are also optional encounters on the surface. There are 6 different ways to kill the dungeon. If it was a sort of a cleaner, more sort of structured adventure, then you go, okay, this bit is relevant. Mm-hmm. But I just don't think it's just such a sort of glorious, sprawling toolkit mess, whatever way I suppose. Toolkit is the most diplomatic way of saying glorious mess, that there was no reason to cut anything.
Right, okay. So how did the development of that massive project differ from the work that you did across the board, across several books for Dracula Dossier?
Dracula Dossier was a very, very different and unique project. Obviously with that I was working day in, day out with Ken Hite and Kat Tobin. There we had Ken's initial outline. There's been an ongoing debate between myself and Ken Hite over which of us did more work on the book, because I technically wrote more words, but he had this initial outline which was sort of this fantastic spine for the whole thing. And while we added bits to it, and it went in lots of unexpected directions, and then we had all the Kickstarter stretch goals and reward tiers on the Kickstarter was come up with something you want us to add and we'll put it in. It became this, again, fantastically sprawling thing, but it's actually more structured than as its own thief, because Gumshoe is fantastic at structuring adventures. So that really was an actual toolkit as opposed to the glorious mess of Stone Thief.
So you've done a lot of these kind of collaborative projects with various different authors. I note when I go back and look at the Gumshoe adventure collections, there some story ideas from the authors, but you do the heavy lifting and the hard work there. What would you advise people when you go into those kinds of collaborative projects? What should be their mindset, or what advice would you give to them?
I think when coming into anything where you're sort of doing the second book, or where you're you were a very nice thing about me ages ago, which I've forgotten, where you're describing as a builder, where it's sort of come along and add stuff onto people, which I really liked, because I think it's actually nicely accurate as well. The trick really is identifying what are the horrible marketing term might be unique selling points, but what are really the sort of core ideas, the really appealing moments of the game, and building and iterating on those. And it's the same in licensed games, actually. I was doing stuff for Babylon 5 or Conan or whatever. And again, the trick there is finding what is the thing that the players really associate, when you say Conan to them, you think barbarians, dungeons, pantherist twists. You think of barbarians, and go, okay, that whatever the adventure's plot is, it has to loop back to those things. It has to iterate on those things. So basically, certainly when we're doing like early books online, don't try and change or don't change or undermine the core concept. Celebrate it. So for like the Ashen Stars adventures, did Dead Rock 7, they're all basically going like you are basically freelance space cops. Here are 4 cases. It didn't attack the premise of the game. It didn't try and change it. It was here are 4 cases. Off you go.
You mentioned Dead Rock 7, which I adore. As well, there's brief cases that you did for Mutant City Blues. And another collection that I really like is Black Bag Jobs that you did for the Laundry. One of the things that strikes me is there's a coherency to those adventures, yet they are very, very different adventures. Every single one of them in that collection, they're doing very different things. How do you get that? How do you approach that to do that kind of development?
Basically, you have the thing you want to celebrate. Like, so for the Laundry, you want to hit some of the core themes, which are going to mathematics, budget espionage, Cthulhu Griblies, bureaucratic humor. You want to basically emulate like how Charlie Stross writes his novels to a degree, and like emulate the voice and everything as well. But that won't give you an adventure. That just really gives you the feel and the motifs you want to use, and then you plug in a plot. Plots in general can be used anywhere. There's a fantastic S. John Ross list of like the 36 role-playing plots. Where the characters are stranded somewhere, they have to go find a MacGuffin, someone has been killed, they got to find out too. You can do a murder mystery in Lord of the Rings, you can do murder mystery in Conan, you can do murder mystery in Babylon 5. The murder mystery part has to work on itself, but you need to basically tie that into the core selling points of the game. So if it's a murder mystery in Babylon 5, it's going to probably involve alien diplomacy, rumors of these ancient First One races, strife between the various factions of Babylon 5. You want the murder mystery part to make to make sense, and okay, here's how the players will get from A to B to C, here are the clues they'll find, here are the decisions they make along the way. And that has to be tie back into the Babylon 5 bits. So for the Laundry, it was here are the Laundry tropes. Here are 7 different plots that I know will work as ventures. There's the go to the dangerous place and solve a problem there, which is the first one, Case Lambent Witch, the oil rig one. There's like a find the lost MacGuffin one. There are various other investigations. Basically, just tie those things together, make sure that, and then sort of sand off seams, hide the seams.
So there's another book that you've written that is the one actually I see talked about the most. I see people writing adventure summaries of playing it. Another game from a licensed thing is Darkening of Mirkwood, which feels to me like an homage to the Great Pendragon campaign.
Homage is if we're saying toolkit is a nice way of saying a glorious mess, then homage is a much nicer way of saying hunt the Pendragon campaign down, tore its guts out, and yes, wore it like a hat. Yeah, it is very, very obviously and consciously inspired by the structure and approach of the Great Pendragon campaign.
Now, had you come up with that initial concept, or was it brought to you?
The initial sort of outline for that campaign was done by Francesco, who, well, actually, he sort of suggested what it could be like in the original One Ring Lore Master's Guide. I can't recall if it was how much of the structure I sort of imposed on it versus his ideas, because it's a long time since they wrote that. But I think we one useful thing with doing sort of like role-play games written by, or when you're coming on the second book on role-playing line, is you can talk to the original designer when it's still fresh in their mind and get their thoughts and ideals. And I think he was also a big fan of the Great Pendragon campaign, so we're sort of on the same page from the start.
What's it like? I mean, have you read other people's after-action reports or seen people talking about that play?
Occasionally, I haven't sort of deliberately sought them out, purely because if it's working as intended, then I sort of know what's going to happen to a degree. If it's gone wrong and I'm sort of either sitting on my hands going, no, you fool, why did you do that? You blew it up yourself. Or, oh dear God, I really should have spotted that in advance. I love hearing of campaigns that are finished. Because then I think the pressure is off. Like at Gen Con, it was really nice hearing lots of people come up going, not just we're playing Dracula Dossier, but we have finished Dracula Dossier, or we're like about to run the finale of Dracula Dossier. Because then you can sort of relax and go, right, okay, they played it, they finished it, it all worked.
Do you often at convention have people coming up and asking about particular details in your adventures?
Occasionally, not a staggering amount. Mainly because like, the old convention where I really interact with people is Gen Con, because I'm based in Ireland, so it's hard to get over for most of them. And Gen Con is just so crazy that you could say anything to me there and it would sort of pass through me because it's like, 5 days of chaos. But the other thing as well is, because I tend to write in many, I don't just do fantasy or just do one line. I sort of the narrative equivalent of Goldfish in that when I'm writing a book, I will know absolutely everything about it. Like when I was doing Darkling and Mirkwood, I had it's a 30-year campaign and I had like all the years in my head. I had all the various NPCs. Same with Dracula Dossier, I had the whole thing. You mentioned NPC, like it'll tell you exactly who they were, what their goals were in all three versions of them, what the connections were. And as soon as it goes off to editing, it's like, oh, okay, let's clear that brain space now for the next thing.
So how much are you working on multiple projects at the same time? Or do you try to really keep those compartmentalized?
At the moment, half my working time is on Pelgrane, and that's at the moment that is just actually up until last week it was just Nice Black Agents 1-to-1, which we're currently calling solo. So I would have one main project, and then one or two side ones, which I try and keep to shorter ones. It depends. I mean, I've gone from being a full-time employed by one company to full-time freelancer to my current situation was like half contract, half sort of part-time employee / freelancer. And even when I was like full-time with Mongoose back in the day, there would be several projects going on. And also, you can't just... It's rare you can write a project and just send it off, you never hear from it again. Either playtest feedback will come back, or editor will come back, or some issue will come up, and you've got to sort of switch gears and go from the depths of one campaign to fixing another one.
What are the typical kinds of things that you get that feedback that is useful to you from playtesters?
It depends, obviously, very much on the project. I like one thing I'm always very, very grateful is just like logic holds. Like if I've made some assumption, especially early in the project, which needs to be patched, where I've said, okay, the players go off to Madagascar, and some playtest goes like, hang on, it would make more sense for them to go to London first. I go, oh yeah, finally to busy cut off that London branch of it early on. It's rarely that useful to sort of hear how someone's game went if it all worked. Like it's nice to hear, but when you're reading playtest feedback, what you want are the problems, the snags, the issues that need to be fixed, as opposed to we played this game. Especially if you give me your some people will write these lengthy feedback reports where they describe their player characters and what their players did. Again, it's nice to read, but if I have to read like 30 of them, what I just want to do is boil down to what are the actual issues. Like one thing I've been working on recently is the Persephone operation, which is 5 adventures for Nice Black Agents. And for that, I wrote the outline for it. I wrote the last adventure, and we had 4 of the writers doing the first 4 adventures. And when it came to playtesting, I would get the playtest feedback, I'd go through it and boil it down to here are the actual action items you need to fix. I sent that on to the writers as opposed to giving them the raw reports, which is sort of a more efficient way to get feedback reports.
Are you enjoying kind of doing that? I know you were line developer for The Laundry, which meant that you oversaw that project. Do you prefer doing that, or do you prefer having your sort of hands-on and being the person who's doing all of the writing?
I would generally say I prefer being the person doing the writing, but at the same time, I know that I need to sort of like mix things up a bit, and that if whatever I'm doing, I will find some reason to love it and some reason to dislike it, which I think is true of any job, like,
Right.
If you lock me in a chocolate factory, I will go, this is a lovely chocolate factory, I really like chocolate, but I'm also, dying of scurvy. With like the editing, I can sort of, sometimes you can sort of feel frustrated going, if I'd written this myself, that problem wouldn't have arisen. But at the same time, if I'd written this myself, I wouldn't have taken that perspective on this adventure, which is the whole virtue of having multiple writers on a book. You can get different people's ideas, different people's twists on a thing.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned about the diversity and the change-up of things. So you have a couple of projects that are just completed Cthulhu City, which I want to come back to and talk about. But I saw, as you mentioned, the Night's Black Agents one-on-one. Let me ask you, what's the challenge there of writing a one-on-one adventure? Is it pretty much the same as doing a standard adventure, or how do you approach that?
One-on-one adventures, on the one hand, have to be a bit more structured, especially in this Agent's case because the player doesn't have backup. In a standard like Night's Black Agents multiplayer game, a large chunk of the session is going to be taken up with basically table chatter and planning and plotting. And one of the useful parts of that planning and plotting is the players will shoot down ideas that are unwise. The downside there is that you end up with turtling, where the players spend the whole session shooting down each other's ideas and end up doing nothing. But in one-to-one, there's a somewhat greater chance the player will sort of plunge headlong into danger. And also one-to-one, you can't kill the player off because that ends the whole session, as opposed to just killing one player where they go and make tea for a while and you work out a way to get the new character in. So basically, the game has to be structured to both cope with the player plunging headlong into danger, but the player also be able to get out of it without it seeming like there is completely consequence-free. So it's been something of a balancing act. I also found that the Cthulhu Confidential, the Cthulhu 1-to-1 rules that it's based on, worked super, super well for Cthulhu. So that when I wrote my Red Mistress adventure for Cthulhu Confidential, that just flowed. Whereas these adventures, I've had to loop around and basically change lots of rules, rewrite the adventures, try them again, change more rules. It's been a slower process than I'd hoped, but hopefully we'll come with a better book at the end of it.
Do you think that's a genre thing, or what feels like the hang-up for you there?
It's partly a genre thing. Basically, and this is sort of looping back again to the whole idea of knowing where the players are. A Cthulhu investigator in one-to-one is this noir protagonist, detective, journalist, whatever. You know that if they're trying to get into, if they know that there's a cultist in a house, they're possibly going to knock on the door or possibly sneak around the back. There are only two options. For a modern day super spy with those gadgets, are they going to knock on the door? Are they going to sneak around the back of the house? Are they going to whip out their night vision camera and scan the house and work out where the guy is and shoot him with an armor-piercing sniper rifle across the street? Are they going to climb on the roof and stick a snake cam down the chimney and scan the place? Are they going to call up their buddy in City Hall, get the architectural plans of the building, storm into the sewers? Are they going to use their elite disguise skills to pretend to be another cultist and go, "Hello, I'm on your side, let me in," bang, and shoot him in the face? Are they going to just convince him they're a fellow cultist, infiltrate the cult, and take down the cult from within and so forth? Because the characters are much more competent and much more willing to entertain oblique solutions, and they're much more sneaky. It's harder to predict what the player is going to do, so the adventures have to be a bit more, have more branches and be a bit looser in the resolution. I don't know if the player's going to punch the guy in the face, so it's more ambiguous as to how you take out the bad guy.
So those adventures seem like they have to have a lot of connective tissue and it's that and things that are overlapping in different ways. But Cthulhu City, which just came out, is a very different beast. So can you give us the 2-minute pitch that you would use to sell someone on the Cthulhu City book? Because I think it's really an amazing city book. I love city books, and it's a really striking volume.
I'd say it's a city book, not an adventure, which makes everything simpler because you don't have to worry about actually. With setting up those adventures, there's much more weight on the GM in a lot of ways. Anyway, Cthulhu City is this surreal urban setting, which is basically all of Lovecraft cities mashed together. So it is this mysterious metropolis north of Boston that has districts like Arkham and Dunwich and Kingsport and Innsmouth, but also has elements of the City of Cthulhu, of the Great Race, of Rillia, of the Marvelous Sunset City in the Dreamlands and so forth. And your characters either have always lived there or arrived there mysteriously, and the mythos is sort of lurking just beneath the surface. So, like, the current mayor is Charles Dexter Ward. The Gilman house was just sort of kicked out of Cthulhu City. There are weird cyclopean skyscrapers. There's a weird quasi-Christian, but not really, church running everything. And one of the mechanical gimmick is that, which I've stolen from Robin Lowell's Armitage Files, all the characters are written up with 3 different versions. So the shopkeeper you meet could either be a victim who's got like some horrible thing lurking behind them, a stalwart ally who can recruit to your cause, or an agent of the mythos who is basically murdering people in his basement and selling you the meat and slowly poisoning you and turning you into a ghoul.
And where did this come from? There's always the fantastic in Lovecraft, but this really embraces that literature of the uncanny in a way that I haven't seen elsewhere. Partly,
I think, because it was an attempt to do something a bit new with Lovecraft. So I've done so many standard, you are investigators, you go off and investigate this cult, and you're sort of trying to reassert the status quo. You're basically, the cultists tend to be either degenerate backwood cultists or corrupt aristocrats who are hiding behind the shield of their money. And once you expose them and bring down the law, human society may ignore the cosmic reason for their crimes. But even if the guy is sacrificing children to Yog-Sothoth, you can bring in the cops. They'll go, "My God, he sacrificed children. We will drag him off to prison." Yes, there were strange lights in the sky. We're going to ignore those and focus on this very sort of human crime. In Cthulhu City, you don't have the recourse to going back to the authorities because they're in on it. The government is corrupt. The police are corrupt. The investigators are the ones who have to basically go underground and hide, which does sort of lend itself to the uncanny because your sort of foundations, your solid ground is stripped away. You can't trust your neighbours. You can't often trust yourself. You definitely can't trust the system. As well, I just wanted to sort of explore basically the imagery of the mythos in a more blatant and obvious way. Is a hard way to put it, but you know what I mean. Bring this on center stage for once. It's nice to be able to sort of do a scenario where there are deep ones without having to either A, do it in a very oblique way so the players don't cop and say, there are deep ones from the start, or do this very sort of stilted thing where you go down to this fishing village and there are strange guys, bulgy guys there, and you player, you know they're deep ones, but your character doesn't. So play through the hideous revelation. Be surprised by the thing you've known for the last 20 years. So I want a setting where I could basically play with Lovecraftian tropes from the start, as opposed to having to either introduce them obliquely or have the players ignore them until they knew about them.
On Friday, October 20th, the very first GauntletCon online gaming convention goes live. One weekend, 100 games. Yes, one weekend, 100 games. On that same day, the GauntletCon Discord server will pop up and blow up. Con attendees will be meeting up, hanging out, chatting, and even getting in some pickup games. Panels? You want panels? We have 10 panels that will be broadcast on YouTube Live. They didn't think I could tell you about all of them in one short promo, but they don't know how determined I am. On Friday, we have Delving Dungeons OSR with Slade Stoller, Maria Rivera, and Jason Hobbs. GMing Masterclass with Jason Cordova, Phil Vecchione, and Ryan Macklin. How to be a great player with Yoshi Creelman, Patrick Knowles, Madjay Brown, and Sherry Stewart. PBTA GMing with David Lafreniere, Lowell Francis, Michael X. Heiligenstein, and Ray Shelke. On Saturday, it's Queering Games with River Williamson and Avery Alder. Camaraderie, Conflict, and Companionship, Intertwining Character Drama and Development with Heroic Fantasy Adventure with Matthew Doty and Jason Cordova. Playing with Problematic and Dark Content with Jason Cordova and Michael X. Heiligenstein. in on Sunday. Inclusivity and Diversity in Games with Rach Shelkey, Stephanie Bryant, Eddie Webb, and Jamal Brown. Adapting Games to Online Play with Paul Sega, Rich Rogers, and Jennifer Kitzman. And of course, Rach and Kate Talk About Feels with Rach Shelkey and Kate Bullock. You can find full information and sign-up instructions at gauntlet-rpg.com/gauntlet-con.html.
So let me ask you about something that I know very little about. I've just seen it mentioned in the Pelgrane press release that seems completely different from Cthulhu City. What is Drone?
Drone is a little game I've been sort of messing with for quite a while now. I generally, as you've known from like sort of studying my rap sheet, so to speak, I rarely invent new games. I've done a lot of second editions. I've done a lot of supplements for games. Even something with The Laundry or Primeval, which were basically the original games I was lead designer on. They were both using existing systems. It's not that I either can or don't want to invent new things, but if the existing game does the job, I would generally prefer to iterate on that as opposed to invent something completely new. The one exception is situations where I want to try something that no game really covers, where existing rule set or mechanics actually exist that I'm aware of. So in Drone, it's a cyberpunk near future game. One player is playing the Drone, who is this resurrected human cyborg. You've recently been killed. You're brought back with no memories, but cybernetic upgrades. And the other players, usually 3 players, are the operators. They're basically running the drone from behind the scenes. And before the game starts, the GM says, okay, drone leaves the room. It says, okay, operators, the mission this time is to assassinate this corporate executive. Here's a brief description of who this executive is. And they go, okay. And they get to decide who the drone was within certain constraints, or like this negotiation with the GM. Okay, the drone was actually the daughter of the executive's business partner. The drone doesn't know this. The drone will recover these memories in the course of play, but they're kept hidden from that player. So they bring the drone back in, drone wakes up, and the mechanics of the game, how it works is each player has a play sheet, sort of Apocalypse World-esque with various moves on it, and there's a pool of dice, which are rolled collectively. So basically, you normally have 8 dice at the start, you roll those, d6s, and then the players take in turns to take dice from that pool to fuel their actions. So you have to work as a team, even though one member of the team is going to be slowly turning against you, because as drone recovers memories that you're not too happy about, being often murdered and turned into a cybernetic assassin. And also the GM gets dice in the pool, because over the course of the game, so the dice all start out black, which is basically safe. But then as the bad guys become more aware of the presence of this intruder, those dice start, and the alert level rises, those dice become red, and when you pick a red dice, the GM gets stacked on it as well. So there's an awful lot of sort of tactical stuff, like which dice do we pick, who goes next, and the more you indulge the drone's memories, the more the drone goes back. They get more dice themselves to use. So you basically want your drone to be a little bit independent, but not completely so.
Wow, that's a really interesting system, and it's a very different system than anything that I've seen you work in before.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. I started out back in the day on the Gaming Outpost. This is back in the late 90s, which was sort of the precursor to the Forge. So my sort of initial exposure to gaming was this, it was with all the sort of the old school indie kids like Ron Edwards and Jared Sorensen and people. And for some reason, I never got into the whole designing game part. I was sort of liked traditional adventure design. So it's rare that I will sort of come up with a entirely new rule system, just iterations of an existing system. So possibly I can't, and it'll all crash and burn. We'll see.
Well, how much have you been looking or exploring within the indie design space in the last few years? I know PBTA obviously is big within that, but we've seen things like Paul Sega's The Clay That Woke, and there are a lot of people doing those kinds of things. How much have you had a chance to do that?
The game I ran most recently was a Blades in the Dark campaign, which is I know it's like in the cool indie band that everyone else is to. And you could tell my utter ignorance of music by the fact that I can't really name that band.
Mm-hmm.
My playgroup at home would tend to sort of default to more traditional games. Like I tried to pitch them on Apocalypse World at one point, and they opened it, and one of them saw sex moves, and that was just this, after that there was no sign on that game ever. It was always just the sex move game, which is horrible and short-sighted, I'm sure, but at the same time, I'm not going to argue that much with them, because I just wanted to play a game, and we ended up playing first edition Warhammer instead, which has been...
Oh my gosh.
Well,
there's the other end of the scale right there.
That said, in both cases, the games were desperate people trying and failing in this harsh, unforgiving world. But yeah, I'll sort of keep tabs on the indie movement, and I think like every other tradish designer, I will go back and steal the cool bits. They'll go off and dig up treasures, and then we will take the cream of the crop and reuse them.
That's really interesting. Do you find yourself reading a lot of other systems, or is it just sort of catch as catch can for you?
If I'm doing a new project, I will generally go out and take a look at, see what others in the field have done. So, for example, the closest I think to drone is Mark Richardson who did Headspace.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, I got that, and that has the same sort of collaborative thing. I looked at that and went, I was very, very glad that it wasn't quite the same as drone, because there's nothing more frustrating than come up with an idea, doing some work on it, and then find that someone else has done the exact same thing that you were going to do, or sort of close enough that the two can't easily coexist, but they are sufficiently different that I was just go look at that and go, oh, that's cool, I would have done that a different way. Oh, I may sort of borrow those ideas slightly. So yeah, I mean, I will back the cool Kickstarter of the day and look at things, but rarely in any sort of structured fashion. I have the usual hard drive full of PDFs, which I will dig through as need arises.
When you look at other writers' adventures, and you have a chance to take a look at those, both editing or if you take a glance around, are there things that you see adventure writers get wrong? What are the missteps for someone writing a more trad adventure?
Trying to think of a way to phrase this doesn't sound incredibly biased.
Okay.
But use Gumshoe. One thing the Gumshoe system has done really, really well is given a way of structuring adventures and structuring information flow. And even if you don't either play Gumshoe or use it or even like it, just take a look at how the adventures are structured. They're broken down by scene. The various clues are given as sort of links in the adventure. Here's how the players get from A to B to C. Because a lot of adventures will have this wall of largely irrelevant text. There's plenty of background the players may never interact with, and don't really tell the GM how to get from the opening scene to the next scene to the next scene explicitly, or it'll depend on a roll that could fail, or it'll just be an entirely linear thing where there is only one way through the adventure. I actually started out doing convention adventures. My first writing was for the local conference to do stuff for, so I'm very much attuned to how do I provide 3 or 4 hours of exciting, interesting, varied play, and how to convey that information to the GM in the most efficient possible form. Because with a convention adventure, especially one where the GM has been handed to run 5 minutes before the con, you don't have time for elaborate backstory or a detailed plot that GM has to sort of unravel before they can run the thing. You have to go, here's what's going on, here's how you use this information, here's how you get that information to the players, here's how the thing should play out, here are the fallback things if things go off the rails a bit, and here are decision points the players can make, so it's not a complete linear railroad.
I want to ask you just a couple more quick questions. I noticed in your list you have Deus Vult as a project that you did, that you kind of did the lead on, and it's one that's kind of fallen off the map for me. So, what is that?
Deus Vult. Matthew Strange, who runs Mongoose, wrote this adventure, this novel set in this setting, where it's basically you are playing these Christian secret assassin warrior monks who hunt the supernatural. So effectively, I mean, it was heavily sort of inspired, I think, by Assassin's Creed, certainly in terms of everyone's wearing hoods and speaking capital letters, and basically you go off and you fight monsters and you have various high-tech goods for the 12th century. So he asked me to do the RPG adaptation of it, and I took that, ran with it, and basically took Umberto Eco's Name of the Rose and Foucault's Pendulum and stuck them together and added in some steampunk gadgets and monster killing, and that was that. Not every project is going to sort of catch fire, and there are sort of like oddities in, I think, every designer's history where like the little things that never really went anywhere. And I mean, I remain quite fond of bits of Deus Vult, but it's going to definitely a footnote in one of your histories of role-playing games, I think.
You also did some stuff with Mongoose's version of Glorantha, including the Drestella, I think. What was it like working with it's such a game with that much lore, and then B, in a completely different age?
This is really verging onto a convention bar question.
Okay.
I have huge respect for Glorantha. And one thing about when you're a full-time writer for a company, there are projects you're given that you may not necessarily, they wouldn't necessarily chosen to work on yourself. So Drestella in particular was one of these books where I did my best with it and was terrified of getting it wrong, but at the same time was aware that I was probably not the right person to do it, because that was one with the cutout for someone who knew Glorantha absolutely backwards, as opposed to someone who was frantically trying to educate themselves on it while writing the book. But I say, when you can't always pick and choose the projects you work on. I apologise to Greg Stafford at one Gen Con going.
That is such a weird line. That is it. Third age Glorantha. It's
second age Glorantha.
Second age Glorantha. It's, as a person who knows a little bit about Glorantha and has run it, I look at those books and I'm like, these are wild. They're so, I mean, they're trapped in such a strange space, and you can tell when you're reading them.
Well, I mean, weird about role-playing games. I mean, the role-playing game hobby, possibly it's changing now, but certainly to a large degree, it's founded on nostalgia. Gamers are very, very slow to let go of the games they love. I mean, I look at John Wick's Kickstarters, which are doing fantastic business. And because basically what you're doing there is you're selling people the game they loved when they were like back in college, only now they are, it's like, 20 years later or so, where everyone suddenly has money and can support like $1 million Kickstarters. So, and Mongoose were very good at finding games where there was an existing fan base which were willing to sort of pay for that nostalgia and get back the games they loved. And that worked very well in some cases. Like Paranoia has been, I think, a very successful iteration of that from my perspective. Traveller has also done well for them, I think. Others, like RuneQuest and Glorantha, the fan base was there, but much, certainly in my case, they didn't have the right writer to match up for that. A better job with Laws and the people who went on to become Design Mechanism. That's a whole other story.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you this then. You mentioned nostalgia. Let me kind of wrap with this question. Is there any setting that you haven't worked on that you'd like to, or something that you've done before that you'd like to revisit?
I have sort of one eye on Blue Planet, which I know my first bit of freelancing ever was for Blue Planet. Again, it's like 20 plus years ago. And that is my sort of like, late 90s nostalgia game, which I would happily pay for. Well, had I $1 million and was for some reason spent it on a role-playing game Kickstarter, that would be what I would pick. But at the same time, I think it's possible to get the same jolt of not like familiarity of like sort of childlike enthusiasm with new stuff as well. Like Dungeon World, for example, although I'm not, it personally isn't my cup of tea in terms of how it plays out. That has very much sort of married the sort of teenage glee of going into a dungeon, like, you know, sort of being 12 again and like discovering this whole rope thing for the first time, with quote unquote cutting edge indie rules. Like the Dracula dossier, actually, interestingly, it doesn't trade nostalgia as sort of like your cultural cachet. Like, you know, it's one thing to have a game of like, you know, you're fighting vampires, but you're fighting Dracula is a whole other feel to it, because suddenly it feels important is the wrong word, but like, you know, it's something you could tell people on the street and they'd get it, which is a fascinating place for a role-playing game to be.
Awesome. So thank you, Gareth Ryder-Hanrahan, and thank you, listeners. Of course, we are on Twitter at Gauntlet RPG. You can find all of our podcasts at gauntlet-rpg.com. That includes Plus One Forward, Fear of a Black Dragon, Comic Strip AP, Discern Realities. Also, if you go to gauntletrpg.com, you can find out about the Gauntlet Hangouts, our online gaming, which includes Gauntlet Con, which is coming up October 20th through 22nd, 2017. You may be listening to this well after that time period, but just know that it happened. We also have a Patreon at Patreon/Gauntlet if you want to check that out and support our games. Supporters who support us at a 7+ tier get early access to the online gameplay. Gareth, thank you once again. Is there anything that you want to mention or you want to plug?
I think what's currently out, depending on when you're reading this.
City.
Cthulhu City is currently out. Pirates of Junax is currently out for Mongoose. I'm on Twitter at Mytholder, MYTHOLDER, and if on the topic of like, you know, things that last for 20 years, I was free to go back and get an easier to spell handle back when, like, you know, we were all doing live journal. But no, I think enjoy gaming. It's fun.